keep it chugging this morning.
Yeah, let's move up.
You know, none of this foldy-roll, Scott's joking around, talking about movies. It's like trains are running on time today, Sarah Mizes Tan. You know what I mean?
We got the eldest daughter here in the seat, so we're going to keep things rolling.
That's right.
I was just, I really like Scott's, we joke around and stuff. I don't know.
Yeah. He's great. Scott's great. Whatever. It's time for Sound Politics. This is Sound Politics. I'm Libby Denkmann.
And I'm Sarah Mizes Tan, sitting in for Scott Greenstone.
And Sarah, it's great to have you back on the show. Today, we're talking about a massive political fight that has embroiled the country. That's redistricting. This has been long simmering and recently boiling over. Late last year, Texas Republicans took steps to redistrict, giving the GOP there 5 more seats in the House of Representatives, the U.S. Congress. Then California did the same, squeezing 5 more Democratic seats out of its map.
And other states followed suit: Florida, Missouri, North Carolina.
Yeah, the dominoes started to fall.
Yep.
Then the Supreme Court ruled that using race to make maps when drawing congressional maps was illegal, further weakening the Voting Rights Act. And now many state legislatures are redrawing maps in the wake of that ruling, though that will likely affect the 2028 election more than this year. But speaking of 2028, here in Washington, some lawmakers have said it might be possible to redistrict before then, too, right? I mean, can you kind of catch us up on what's been going on here?
Yeah, so a couple weeks ago, we talked about State Democratic Party Chair Shasti Conrad telling the New York Times that voters could weigh in on a new map as early as 2027. After that, Governor Ferguson jumped in and posted on X that if the electoral pieces fell into place, quote, I would not only support a redistricting effort, I would lead it.
Yeah, Democrats in D.C. would certainly welcome this. I mean, margins in Congress are razor thin. House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries recently included Washington on a list of 7 Democratic-run states that could possibly redistrict before 2028.
And our federal congressional delegation has 8 Democrats and 2 Republicans. Of those 8 Democrats, there is one district that's particularly purple. That's the seat currently held by Marie Gluesenkamp Perez. Democrats think they could slice up the state in redistricting efforts so there's only one Republican district, meaning Democrats would hold the other 9.
But, I mean, that's getting way ahead of themselves, right? I mean, first, Democrats in Olympia need to flip several seats in the state House and Senate. Sarah, what actually needs to happen for Democrats to have the power to redistrict in between the once-in-a-decade census?
So the state has guardrails in place that prevent the kind of rush to redistricting that we're seeing across the country right now. Washington's Redistricting Commission is not set to redraw its maps until the next census, so that would put it around 2030, 2031. For one party to change when the state does redistricting, they could pass a bill to amend the Constitution, but they'd need a supermajority in the legislature to pull that off, which means they'd need to hold 2/3 of the seats in the House and Senate. Right now, Democrats need 3 more seats in the state Senate and 7 more seats in the House to achieve this. And if they manage to pass an amendment out of the legislature, it still needs a vote of the people, and that's all before redistricting can happen.
And that sounds pretty complicated. So that's why we say, several state legislative seats in Olympia would need to flip before the state can begin the process of radically redrawing its congressional district maps. But that does not mean Democrats are giving up on the dream. We're going to hear all about that from one of the dreamers after a quick break on Sound Politics. And we're back with Sound Politics. And today on the show, can Washington state take part in the redistricting wars?
People in Olympia are thinking about it. This year, one state representative sponsored a bill to change the state constitution to allow lawmakers to redraw district maps with a simple majority vote rather than needing that 2/3 majority vote we talked about. That measure didn't make it out of committee, but it did make us here at Sound Politics sit up in our chairs and take notice.
Yeah, this would have made a significant change to the way the state draws congressional and legislative districts. Right now, Washington has this bipartisan redistricting commission that meets every decade, and this bill would have let the state redraw its districts sooner if another state also did so. Basically, let the evergreen state get in on the redistricting arms race that's happening all over America.
to pull this off, to amend the state constitution for this purpose, legislative Dems would likely need a larger majority than they have now. And that means they'd have to knock Republicans out of seats in a number of districts across the state.
Which, to be fair, is not likely to happen this year. So we're probably talking about down the road a few years in the future, if ever.
True. But it really does show you how much redistricting fever has gripped the nation, even in places like Washington, where our system is supposed to keep us apart from some of the partisan gerrymandering that we're seeing in other states. Even here, there's a conversation happening about it. And in a similar vein, just recently, there was a push to reopen a case that redrew legislative district lines in the Yakima Valley to elevate the Latino vote. Republican opponents want the U.S. Supreme Court to weigh in on that. They point to this Yakima case as an example of racial gerrymandering. For now, the lines are going to stay the way they are, but clearly you can see how the national fight over gerrymandering has struck a chord, even in this state, where redistricting really is supposed to be less partisan.
So that case in Yakima is a legislative district, so state legislature. Now we're going to turn our attention back to congressional districts and talk a little bit more about how Democrats think they can redraw those lines potentially and how likely it is that they'll get what they want. And to talk about that, we're joined by Joe Fitzgibbon. He is a Democrat and the state House Majority Leader. He was also the prime sponsor of that failed constitutional amendment that we talked about that would have changed how easy it is to kickstart a redistricting effort in our state. Joe Fitzgibbon represents West Seattle, White Center, Vashon, and Burien in Olympia, and he joins us now. Representative Fitzgibbon, thanks for being on the show. Hello.
Hi, Libby. Hi, Sarah. Thank you for having me.
So there is a lot of news about redistricting, a lot of the conversation about what is and is not possible. You've already planted a flag on this issue with the constitutional amendment you introduced. Do you still think that you and your colleagues should try to get another Democrat on the congressional delegation?
Yeah, I do think that this is the right way to draw congressional maps. What I'd really rather see is that all 50 states draw congressional lines and legislative lines using a nonpartisan process. But that's unfortunately not the choice that's in front of us now, given what the Supreme Court has done in getting the Voting Rights Act, given what states like Texas and Florida have done in redrawing their congressional maps. So I absolutely think Washington needs to try in order to just protect our democracy from the erosion that we're seeing in those other states.
So I'm just going to note that we're going to swap over to the phone here because we had a little bit of a choppy internet connection. So you're going to hear Representative Fitzgibbon continue with our interview with a different connection. This is going to be the phone conversation here. And we're wondering, if you can just lay it out for us, Representative, what are the steps that Washington would have to take in order to redistrict? Because obviously the bipartisan redistricting commission requires this to happen every 10 years around the census. So what are the kind of building blocks to getting to where you want to go, which is redrawing the maps?
Yeah, so our redistricting commission and the entire redistricting process is in the Washington state constitution. So in order to create another pathway to draw congressional maps, we would need to amend the state constitution. The process for amending the Washington state constitution is to propose an amendment through the legislature. So a 2/3 vote in both the state house and state senate is required. And then that November, the voters of Washington would be asked to approve or disapprove the proposed constitutional amendment. So what I have authored is an amendment to the Washington state constitution. It would have to be passed again by 2/3 in each chamber and then approved by the voters. It would not eliminate the redistricting commission, but what it would do is create a separate pathway that if other states start to redraw their congressional maps mid-decade, as we saw Texas kick off this last round of redistricting at the behest of Donald Trump, then the Washington legislature could come in and with a simple majority vote redraw our congressional map. So our primary process for drawing maps, the only process for drawing legislative maps, would still be the bipartisan redistricting commission. But if we do start to see this arms race where states like Texas and Florida and Tennessee and North Carolina and Ohio and Missouri redraw their maps, then Washington could step in and do it. Now, that would, again, require the approval of a constitutional amendment, which is a pretty high bar to clear to amend the Washington state constitution. If that amendment passed and we saw other states redraw their maps mid-decade, then the Washington legislature could adopt a new map.
And yeah, Senate Majority Leader Jamie Peterson did call the idea of redistricting before 2028, quote unquote, a little far-fetched. Democrats would need to flip several seats in both chambers in Olympia in order to get this majority you're talking about. I've heard that there are some seats in the Yakima area in play, and maybe a few in and around Vancouver. Is achieving a supermajority doable, in your opinion?
I definitely think it's doable in the state house. I think it's a tougher hill to climb in the state Senate just because of which seats are up. In our state Senate, half of the seats are up every 2 years, and then each seat is up every 4 years, and so they're on two different cycles.
Even though it's 7 seats in the House, you think it's more doable in the House? That's interesting.
I do think it's more doable in the House just because every seat in the House, all 98 seats in the House are up. And I absolutely think that there are enough districts that, given what we're seeing in terms of the frustration with Republican governance at the national level, we absolutely expect to have a year where Democrats pick up seats in the state House. I think in the Vancouver area, in the Yakima area, there's one seat in the Gig Harbor Port Orchard area that absolutely are very possible for Democrats to flip this election. The last time we had an election where Democrats picked up 7 seats in the House and 3 seats in the Senate was in 2018. That was in Donald Trump's first midterm. That was the best year that Democrats had seen in legislative races in a long time. It would be even harder to get to that number of flips this year because we've already flipped some of the low-hanging fruit back in 2018. But the frustration with the Republican Party at the national level is absolutely making its way to legislative races in Washington. And I think that we are going to see a lot of seats move towards the Democrats this November.
Do you see the redistricting issue as a winning one on the campaign trail for legislative candidates? Like, do you see that as something that they should be talking about when they're campaigning?
Yeah, I don't think it's something that Democratic candidates should shy away from. That said, I think that what voters most want to hear about from Democrats on the campaign trail is what are you going to do for the cost of living in this state? What are you going to do for the safety of my community? What are you going to do for the quality of public education in my community and the affordability of healthcare? I think that that's what our candidates will be most focused on. But I think when the issue of redistricting comes up, Washingtonians are worried about the state of our democracy. And Washingtonians are constantly, every day I get asked by constituents, what are you doing to stand up to the federal government? I'm really scared about the road that we're on. I'm really scared about this slippery slope that it seems like we're on towards erosion of democratic norms. And what are you doing about it? And to me, this is one of the most important ways that we can respond. Is by saying that we're not just going to say only Republican states can redistrict their congressional maps, that Democratic states are going to fight back if that is something that other states start to engage in. So, well, it isn't the first thing I would mention if I was, knocking on the door of a voter in Vancouver. It is something that I think our candidates won't shy away from if asked.
So Washington does have an independent redistricting commission that has been in place since 1983. We were one of the first states in the country to adopt a system like this. It has been held up as a way to protect the state from gerrymandering, and it's been seen as best practice for ensuring fairer representation. California also had an independent redistricting commission, and that's out the window now with the escalation in redistricting wars. Virginia similarly tried to supersede its independent commission, but that was struck down by the state Supreme Court. Do you think Washington voters are ready to abandon the goal of nonpartisan maps?
I don't think that Washington voters want to abandon the goal of nonpartisan maps, nor do I. Now, I think that the gold standard for how to draw both congressional and legislative maps would be to have a nonpartisan process, not a bipartisan process, but a nonpartisan process where the partisan affiliation of voters doesn't even come into view. That's how Canada does it. That's how Australia does it. That's how the United Kingdom does it. That's how I think that American states should draw congressional and legislative maps. With congressional maps in particular, what's really dangerous is if you have only one side of the aisle that is engaging in redistricting. I don't think that Washington voters want to see us engaged in the arms race that we're in, that Donald Trump and the state of Texas kicked off last summer. But I definitely don't think Washington voters want us to roll over and say, do whatever you want. We're going to stick with our good old bipartisan process here because that's what we've had since 1983. I think that Washingtonians want us to step up and protect our democracy, and that's what's called for when we're seeing the kind of, the Voting Rights Act get gutted by the U.S. Supreme Court. Cities like Memphis and Kansas City having their congressional districts eliminated. I think Washington voters would stand up to say that this is the right thing to do if that question was put before them.
Kind of like California and Virginia voters did.
Yeah.
So what I'm hearing you say is doing this state by state, so instituting nonpartisan processes mostly in Democratic-led states. Was it kind of naive on the part of Democrats? Was it like a unilateral disarmament that they should have seen down the road what could have happened, following this process?
I do think it was a mistake, and I think that there are folks like Nancy Pelosi who said at the time that they thought it was a mistake. And I think Washington's in a little bit different category because our redistricting commission predates the sort of good government wave of congressional redistricting reforms that we saw in under Barack Obama. So in California, Virginia, Colorado, a number of states New York adopted new redistricting processes. Ours is much older. Our redistricting commission is older than I am. It was adopted in 1983, as you noted. It came about in a different time, and due to some admittedly very bad redistricting processes in the legislature in the years that preceded that, it was agreed to by Democrats and Republicans when it passed back in the 80s. But I think it was a mistake for Democrats to say we're going to move our redistricting processes to nonpartisan commissions without seeing a reciprocal effort in states like Texas and Florida. I think that has put us at risk.
So theoretically, if Democrats were to get a supermajority, not just in the House, as you say, which is maybe more in reach than the Senate this year, the state Senate, and Democrats passed the constitutional amendment and redistrict. Do you like the maps that have been circulated so far? I've seen one that's kind of like creates like pie slices that extend from Seattle all the way to Spokane Valley. I mean, what is your opinion of like the reality of this would be a very, very gerrymandered map, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I don't have like a preference to express today about what map is good. I know that, lots of folks like to play around with what their dream map could look like. And, the idea of a 10-0 map where there's 10 Democratic districts and 0 Republican districts, would necessitate things like, carving up Seattle like a pizza and
like
having
a pinwheel.
Slices, go out to Spokane Valley. What I think makes more sense in my mind would be a district that still or a map that still has 2 Eastern Washington districts, but maybe one of those districts is more competitive than either of them are today. Currently, you have 2 overwhelmingly Eastern Washington Republican districts because they can include both urban centers and really red rural areas. It is possible to conceive of a congressional map that includes urban areas east of the mountains like Spokane, Yakima, Pullman, parts of the Tri-Cities, parts of Walla Walla, that is, if not overwhelmingly Democratic, but would be competitive, where voters in those areas, wouldn't just have it be a foregone conclusion that whoever is the top vote getting Republican is elected to Congress. I think that could be really good for voters in that area. Voters in Spokane and Yakima have been hit incredibly harder than anybody else in the state, by the actions of their members of Congress in rolling back Medicaid and food assistance. So I think that something like that would be interesting. Would be a congressional district that allows the more urban voters of Eastern Washington to have a competitive race.
And we're talking about scenarios here, but, just before we go, Representative Fitzgibbon, what do you think the actual chances are of this happening anytime soon? Like, what are the realistically the soonest Democrats would actually be able to get a supermajority in both chambers?
I mean, I think it's a pretty steep hill to climb for 2020, for the 2026 election and then the 27 legislative session. I think it is not at all out of the question to think that we could come out of the 2028 election with a supermajority in both chambers. Now, if we don't have a supermajority coming out of either 26 or 28, then this is not going to happen, right? We know that there's not going to be any Republican votes in the legislature for a constitutional amendment that limits Donald Trump's ability to lock in a Republican Congress. But I think that it's easier to imagine after the 2028 election. Of course, we would still have to make sure that all Democrats in the legislature agreed that putting that constitutional amendment before the voters was the right thing. But I think that that's when I would most, be unsurprised to see this come up in the legislature would be after the 28 election.
House Majority Leader Joe Fitzgibbon, thank you so much for being here with us.
Sure thing. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Libby.
That's it for Sound Politics. I'm Sarah Mizes-Tan. Our editor is Kat Smith. Our producer is Hans Anderson.
Get well soon, Scott. I like talking to you about movies, and I like your faldy-roll. I'm Libby Denkmann. The show is only possible because of your support. Please consider a donation at kuow.org/politics, and we'll see you next time.